All right. So when it comes to social media platforms and content creation, we, the people, get tired, but man, those algorithms don't. Welcome to this week's episode of Make Sense, a video podcast that simplifies complex issues at the intersection of tech and people. So whether you're totally hyped on artificial intelligence and ready for the robots to take over, or you want to crawl into a cave after deleting all of your social media accounts, I'm here with my guests to help make sense of what's going on so you can design yourself into the future. My name is Lindsay Tabus. I'm a product market fit strategist and innovation advisor. I've always been obsessed with designing technology for people. So let's get started. All right. Today I have Nicole Tremaglio, pop culture podcast host of Nickstalgia, a video podcast where her and her guests explore the evolution of culture and technology. Nicole ties these interests in with her work as a very talented Web3 marketer in the entertainment industry. Let's dive in. Nicole, how are you?
I am good. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to have this conversation. We talked about it a few months ago. So last we spoke, you had been exploring Web3 for well over a year, and you said the experience had you question the Web2 model of followers and following. So first, could you define the Web2 model and then tell us about that journey into Web3?
Definitely. So, Web 2, for anybody who might not be familiar in calling it in that particular term, is essentially social media as we know it today. And this has been the prevalent form of the internet since way back when we had static websites, before we were really using social media to communicate to one another, and before every creator essentially became someone who was putting content onto these platforms to reach a wider audience. And so I, like many content creators out there, just kind of got tired of constantly producing and kind of feeling like you're at the mercy of these platforms, because at the end of the day, unless you're a really big account or unless you have forged relationships with brands, which can happen at any size, but unless you have one of those two things, essentially the platform is making money off of you creating, not you. And so I became a little frustrated with this way back in the Instagram influencer 1.0 era of the mid 2010s, when I saw so many people around me kind of becoming influencers and gaining reach online. Oh, yeah, Lindsay's using influencer in air quotes. Um, which is true, but I think that for me, I always felt like a little bit of the odd person out, in that I kind of had this naive look of like, I just want a community and to bring people together and make them feel like a part of something, and have that be my ultimate purpose of having any kind of externally facing presence online.
Right.
But it's not all about like being happy and holding hands on social media. Now it's about making money. It's about the attention economy. It's about getting eyeballs. It's about getting ad revenue. It's just kind of mutated into this thing that we all just can barely even recognize anymore. And I thought there has to be something better. There has to be something different. And I'm a millennial, and I'm constantly thinking about, just especially with my podcast, about the evolution of technology, the
Right.
different iterations that the
Right.
internet can make, and ultimately, how can that make it better for us all as people who do love
Yeah.
technology and culture?
So
What can we do?
question real quick.
Yeah.
When did you join Facebook? How old were you?
I joined Facebook in 2006, and I was in high school, and it was relatively soon, maybe a year or so after it stopped being available to all college students. But I would consider MySpace in 2005 my first social media endeavor.
Sure, sure. And like MySpace gave you creative expression. You could add your favorite music, you could show your top friends, you could design. So there was a lot of personalization in that. I joined Facebook in the spring of 2004 when I was a junior in college. And literally it was a copy of the manual, like paper Facebook. Remember being able to sort or filter by different sororities and fraternities and be able to get people's phone numbers. Like it was about connecting with people you knew in your community, right? Um, and it wasn't necessarily about connecting with strangers or building, a following. So it had a real purpose, for a long time when it came to connecting people. So Web 2's very frustrating, if you are trying to search for connection at this point because of that monetization and the ad network and the influencer, blah, 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 blah. So how'd you get into Web 3?
Yeah, I actually, and now I never use Facebook, but I was a part of a Facebook group, a women focused networking group based in New York City prior to the pandemic. And there was a Facebook group, and someone said, "Hey, are there any women focused crypto or Web3 groups out there?" And someone commented the group of an organization that I ended up joining. And at the first in person event that I ever went to with that org, I met the person who had originally posted that question.
So cool.
And which I didn't even know until after I got home. And when I met her in person, we realized we'd actually done some work at the same company. And at the same time, I'm like, I must have seen you in the hallway at some point or another. So, really cool to have that as my introductory experience to Web3, in there already being this kind of weird synchronicity between me and someone that I had totally met randomly through the internet. I was a
Sure.
little young for kind of like meeting up with people via like the really old AOL chat rooms and things like
Right.
that. Because you would kind of meet MySpace friends at the mall in high school, which at the time it was like, oh my God, don't make friends on the internet. But now it's like, I make so many friends
I
on the
make so
internet.
many internet friends.
Yeah, it was kind of serendipitous meeting someone through a Web3 organization in this way in person, where we already had these little synchronicities of things that we had in common. And it was a very encouraging way to realize that, unlike when we were younger and were advised not to meet people through the internet, now this was a brand new way to really open up a door to connection. And I had really felt like I had lost that through social media. The idea of meeting new people, making friends, finding people with like minded interests,
Right.
it turned into commerce essentially on Instagram. And so now having a new platform to be able to explore was really exciting again.
So, what did you learn from Web 3, from exploring it, and how can you kind of compare and contrast what you get out of the Web 3 model versus Web 2? And if you could help us understand what the Web 3 model really is, that would be awesome.
Yeah, at this stage, it's still pretty early. And so we have some early adopters to different aspects of a decentralized web. So, how we like to think of it is, okay, social media is all centralized. It's Google, it's Facebook. Facebook owns Instagram, Facebook owns WhatsApp. And all of these companies decide via their algorithms, which are totally black box. You don't have privy to what goes on behind closed doors, but they're ultimately controlling everything you see. They are curating your reality in response to what you watch, what you consume, what you tell these apps that you want to see, so then they can figure out what you want to buy. And
Right.
so it kind of puts ownership is like ownership, community, these are all huge buzzwords. And so just as words themselves are very general, but to just add in a little bit of context around it, the idea is that if you were to put content out there, you could actually own that content yourself. What if Instagram shut down tomorrow and you didn't have your followers anymore? How would you communicate with them? or if you are a business owner, a consultant, a coach, whoever that uses social media as a platform to sell your products or services, what would you do? You
Right.
don't own any of that. So the idea with Web3 is that there are platforms that support the ownership and the sovereignty of your activities online. And there's also an element of interoperability too. So, for example, I would say the closest thing like this in Web2 that exists now is, for example, logging into an account with your Facebook. Oh,
Hmm.
log in with Facebook, log in with Google. And that kind of helps different apps speak to one another, but otherwise they completely operate in silos. And
Sure.
so much is developing around how to create like a cohesive digital identity. So no matter where you bop around on the
Yeah.
web, all of your various traits and anything associated with you comes with you.
Yeah. If I could make it make sense for our audience, imagine, you're strictly watching Netflix for a year or two, and Netflix algorithm really gets to know what you like. You decide you want to subscribe to Hulu because there's some hot show, and you have to almost start from scratch. You have to train Hulu's algorithm to know what kind of TV you like, what kind of movies you like, what genres. So it's the same in kind of web two. I think you might have said it on one of your podcasts, but it's always interesting to see what the internet thinks or who the internet thinks I am, right? So if you don't really use YouTube and you start going and watching videos and it starts serving you up ads, those ads are mighty ridiculous for what you want to see, whereas if you're using Instagram every day, they'll just serve you up ad after ad after ad if you like click one thing, and it'll all be for the same category. So yeah, so you're saying that somehow I could own my TV and movie preferences and port them over to Hulu or Netflix or Apple TV, hypothetically, in the Web3 version of the world, I could own that information and decide to share it with each service so they can give me better recommendations.
Yeah, essentially, you get to choose what you want to share. I think that's an important differentiation too. Whereas now, when people click accept cookies or accept terms, most people don't really read those at
They don't know
all,
what
let
it
alone,
is. Right.
yeah, let alone understand them or understand any kind of implications that means for your privacy, for your security, for your data.
Hmm.
And for the most part, it doesn't affect people until it does.
Right.
And so I think that anything that allows you to be more aware of what's going on with your own information, like any iteration of the internet, people said 20, 30 years ago, the internet's bad, the internet's scary. Yeah, it is. It
Yeah.
still is 20 and 30 years later. But it's also helped us progress as a society and regress in some ways,
Yeah,
depending on who you're
right,
talking
sure.
to.
I think, people are scared of what they don't understand, and there's still quite a lot that people don't understand. One of the things you started talking about is, the ad supported model on these social platforms, right? We are actually the product, our data is the product. Um, and I had an analogy, or kind of not a metaphor, it's not an analogy, but like if if we know that social is addictive and it manipulates our emotions and it uses us to make money, could we call social either an abusive boyfriend or even a pimp?
That's
Like,
dark. That's dark.
that's
But you
dark,
know
right?
what?
But
It's you know what? I mentioned a little earlier that my purpose in what I do is truly to bring people together and make them feel like a part of something. And I think that that sense of belonging and inclusion is something that people always look for. And I always say that everything goes back to like your middle school trauma, like your coming
Right.
of age uh, story in that narrative that you write about yourself.
That's
Kind of like
absolutely true.
who you, right? It's like, who does the internet think I am? Well, then therefore, how am I interpreting that as what is my identity? If this is always showing me certain videos, does this mean I'm this kind of person? And people are ultimately looking for inclusion, belonging, and meaning in their lives. And when you're in middle school and you get excluded from the big sleepover, or, there's so many different
That
analogies
might
that you
turn
can
into on
make.
Instagram, you're, um, wanting to get more followers and get more attention because maybe you didn't have that when you were younger, right?
Yeah, or like you look to other people for how you should behave.
Right.
It's so simple. And anything that if you are someone who, and it can be tricky for everybody, but especially for people who are insecure and don't have a strong sense of self, they don't necessarily have strong opinions held about anything. They can waver on their likes and their dislikes. Um, it can be really difficult for a
And
person that's
damaging.
impressionable, yeah,
Yeah.
to navigate, so especially young people, to navigate social media in
It
that
can
way.
also become a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts, right? Um, I wanted to ask you, so in the intro call, I called out your video podcast, Nostalgia, where you have, I also love this tagline, you have deep conversations about superficial things, examining the 90s, 2000s, and more through your contemporary lens. So you started Nostalgia in late 2021, beginning of 2022. You've published over 40 episodes and have a reach of over, 10,000, 15,000 on social or more. So I guess how are you like going into launching this? How are you leveraging Web 2 social when you started the journey to kind of get the word out? And were you getting what you needed then? And how has that changed now?
Yeah, but simultaneously working in Web3 and doing my podcast and just being a content creator, I mean, wow, it changed so much over the course of the last year. When I first was launching the podcast, which the day that we're recording this episode happens to be the 1 year anniversary of my first episode. And so
Congratulations.
that's exciting. Thank you. And
You're passing the
to
baton.
ramp, I am, right? Um here you go.
Thank you.
And to ramp up, I did the 13 days of nostalgia. So reminiscent, think of like ABC Family, where it was like the 13 nights of Halloween or like the 25 days of Christmas or whatever. So I'm like, okay, 13 days of nostalgia. For 13 days in a row, I'm going to create a piece of content that is like a remake of a popular television show theme or something nostalgic and kitschy,
Cool.
just to really like teach myself how to kind of edit videos and to just put something out there and having it be done rather than perfect.
That's an
My
awesome attitude.
Yeah, my perfectionism prior to the podcast held me back a lot, and how I've been able to get over it is just being around supportive people who are like, it's okay if you make a mistake. It's okay if the first iteration of copy that you write isn't perfect. Um, because I genuinely felt before like it had to be. And I found that for those 13 days, it was so stressful because I would do everything at the last minute. And then you feel this obligation to post. And for me, that is my sign to myself that I'm not living in alignment with my own values. The expression, the enthusiasm, the curiosity, the
Right.
connection,
So
that's what I go
negative,
back
right?
to. Yeah, that's what I go back to. And when I realized, oh, wow, I'm just like making these videos kind of to prove to myself that I can be consistent, and yet I'm under preparing and spending way too much time editing and concepting, and it
Right.
can be tricky having to learn how to set up systems for yourself of how you best make content. I was also self-employed at the time too, which was an added element of stickiness because on one hand, I was so grateful to have time and space to be able to explore and create without pressure. I say without pressure for 2 seconds, but
But
then
it's
you're
like
like, wait, but I'm
you were putting the pressure on.
right. And it's like, I'm self employed. So now does this mean that like I have to monetize this podcast? I have to make money off of this
Right.
podcast? That how does
What
this
happened to
relate to my
just doing it for fun?
consulting?
Right. Yeah.
Hmm.
Right.
And immediately putting that pressure on myself. Mid-year, I was like, okay, I've done enough episodes where I can continue to just cultivate these relationships and be able to get sponsors and have like big sponsors. And then I just always dragged my feet
What do
in
you think it
really getting the
was?
ball rolling
Was it
because
something about
I don't want to do it.
the follower following thing? It's like that part of it wasn't fun, like thinking about how many followers do I need for a brand to take me seriously, and um you know, I've had to think about it for sure for my own product consulting business. How many followers do I need for future customers to think that or get the impression that I know what I'm doing, right? And then you chase followers rather than providing value or thinking of, what kind of creative expression makes you happy. And so your awareness to how that was all making you feel is very impressive, and something that the listeners could start to think and pay attention to is like, when you open Instagram, how is it making you feel? You don't have to be a content creator to feel that stress or pressure. So continue. I interrupted you. The realization when you thought like, okay, I need to go after influencers. This needs to be a money making thing.
Yeah, I didn't want it to become something that I resented. And when I always had on my to-do list, okay, reach out to this brand to become a sponsor. It's like, why am I not doing it? You know
Mhm.
how that is, Lindsay and listener, where you have this long list of to-dos that could go on forever that you just keep adding more and more and more tasks to that you may or may not actually intend to finish. And I found for me that I wanted the show to I think I had run a fitness events platform several years ago during, like I mentioned, that influencer 1.0 era when I saw all of these people gain a lot of followers around me.
Right.
And I always felt this like anti mentality where it's like, well, I'm going to prove that you don't need these vanity metrics to get ahead, but like
Yeah.
you truly
Right.
did. And then I felt kind of stupid of like, wow, why didn't I just play the game when algorithms actually did work more in people's favor?
But
But
you and
now it's
me,
like,
I take you as this person, like, I don't want to play the game. There's sure, if we're running a marathon and it's an organized event, there is a set route and you have to stick to it. But life is not a set route. If you want to get to the end, there are options for, getting on the subway and cutting corners. And I like you get caught up because probably at the same time that you were doing that, I had a e-commerce store selling athleisure apparel. And so I was in the fitness Instagram world too. And man, that's a hard world to be in if you can't do, perfect splits and headstands in, beautiful yoga attire. It's a hard world to compete in.
I mean, culturally, it was the height of the girl boss era too. And that's a whole separate conversation. But
For sure.
essentially, I wanted to have integrity around what I was doing. And when you constantly have any kind of feelings of ickiness, of like, I don't like how I'm showing up on social media, or I feel like I'm doing myself a disservice so I could please other people, it's like you really have to listen to those signs from yourself, because if something
Right.
doesn't feel good, you can use that as a guidepost as well. I always used to think that you had to know exactly everything that you wanted to do and have this intense growth plan and show up and create content every single day in order to have any kind of real value or impact. And that's not true. The way that you have the most value and impact is by being yourself. And there's a really big difference between, and again, this relates to fitness in a completely different way, but in any niche on social media, there's such a difference between being in constant pursuit of self improvement rather than just self acceptance. We're always going to be learning. Like, you're
Hmm.
never going to know everything in the world. You're never going to be all knowing about any particular thing, but you don't have to beat yourself up along the way. Like, you have to remain open to the fact that you're going to learn and grow and progress and become better the more
Sure.
content that you create, the more time you put into something, but that at the same time, there's no magic number of posts that you do to get it. You kind of have to just realize that you showing up as you and being happy with what you're producing now, as opposed
Mhm.
to a you in the future, and you start really being grateful for the people who do show up for you instead of those who don't, it
100%.
changes everything.
I love you're talking about one, bringing awareness to how any of these platforms make you feel. And
Mm,
two, we kind of touched on how I started the show by saying, we people, we get tired, but algorithms don't. So if you can admit that now, if you can say, I'm not going to beat this algorithm, and I have a note on that too. If you can say, I'm not going to beat this algorithm, that can be incredibly freeing, right? If and one thing that I've been thinking about when it comes to algorithms and trying to decode them is that there are so many different software developers that have worked on these algorithms, and there's planned randomness built into the way these algorithms work. Even though that there are so many blog posts to tell you like this is the best time to post and this many hashtags and blah 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 blah, like no one actually knows, not even the people that have built it, because they couldn't possibly know all the code that goes into the algorithm. So then at the end of the day is like playing the content game. Is that like putting another quarter in the slot machine and thinking that if you press the button just at this right angle after you see the seven go by, that you're going to hit the jackpot? You know, it does have that amount of randomness in it. So for an average person that's not a content creator, who's just looking for social validation, or someone that is looking to build a following via content, it sounds like, from my perspective and from your perspective, having intention about what you want out of that platform and being aware of how the content on that platform is making you feel, that is going to help you kind of control the robot instead of letting the robot control you, right?
yeah, intentionality is key in absolutely everything. And when it comes down to it, like I said, it's an industry, it's commercialized. And the people who are telling you about, like, it's a job just to tell people about how to succeed on various social media platforms. There's coaches for it, there's all kinds of quote experts on these things. And it's like, it's marketing in a different form. The way that we had billboards and magazine advertisements and stuff like that in decades past, it's really the same thing. And, algorithms don't get tired. I do, is, what my friend Brian said to me on my podcast, because he had found that as a creator, and his biggest audience is on TikTok. He was like, TikTok just wants me to make the same video over and over again. And when I do, it rewards me. But as a creator, that's not very rewarding in and of
Right.
itself, because as a creator, I want to create. I want to be creative. I'm a musician. I'm a producer. And you wanting
Yeah.
to try your hand at all these different things is wonderful. But when the very platforms that made you have a large audience and a wide reach are stifling your growth, that's when you get to decide, how much of myself do I want to give away? How much power do I want to give to this platform, in exchange for the social validation that I get from it?
Right. Now, you had said that Web3 also helped inform your intentions for the Web2 platforms, uh, focusing more on relationships, community, sharing memes with friends and direct messages. So, what was the experience, or what was a project or community you were in Web3 that, really filled your cup and made you feel great and say, how can I get this out of these other places where I connect with all the other people that aren't jumping into Web3 just yet?
Yeah,
Right.
definitely. And a quick aside on that, I had an astrology reading last year
Love
where
it.
she said to me, "You're gonna have to decide what's worse, the pain of kind of not fitting in, or like, oh, I'm talking about Web3 and nobody else is here, seemingly, or the pain of like fitting in and being like everyone else and not following your curiosity when that's something that means a lot to you." So I'm like, okay, good point, good point. Two opposing things can be true simultaneously. There's all sorts of
Absolutely.
contradictions and dichotomies in life. But something that was really fun last year, so I'm on the core team for an org called Her House. And we hosted a trivia night with another org called Crypto Witch Club. And
Love
Shireen
it.
from that was on my podcast as well. And we talked about crypto pop culture, and they educate through the lens of pop culture. And Web3 is a really, really wide umbrella that can refer to cryptocurrency. It can refer to DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. It can refer to um, regenerative finance. Like, there's so many different little corners. And so that is like a huge blanket statement. However, I just like, as much as I like talking about the past and nostalgia, I love talking about the future too and technology. So yeah, we did a trivia night and all the slides had, the Spice Girls on them or this or that. And I'm like, this is so fun for me because so much material, especially as it gets increasingly technical, gets increasingly boring and
Right.
dry. And that
Right.
is so not how I learn. And so to just
Right.
be in a room with a microphone on the little stage with the Spice Girls behind me, my girls, and getting to talk about something that's fun. And yeah, it was educational too, which I guess is a bonus, but just to feel like, oh my gosh, there really are people out here like me who love technology and culture.
Right. Right. I need to come to the next one because I
Yes.
need, you and I have that in common, which is why I invited you on here. So, well, cool. So I wanted to end with maybe some suggestions and tips for people how we can be more intentional about our use of social media platforms, so that we don't get algorithm fatigue. So which platforms are you on and what do you use them for?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe who are you connecting with on those platforms?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think being aware of what your social media stack is at any given moment. Yeah, like we mentioned, intentionality around really everything in life, online and offline, is important. Um, but I'm someone who likes to try a bunch of new apps too. And so I think that's when it can especially get noisy. I would say primarily I'm on Instagram and Twitter. I was on TikTok mainly for a moment, but I just found that for TikTok, I really wanted to be there to create and not necessarily to consume. And I think that is where most people struggle because they're like, I can't download TikTok or I'll be on it for 24 hours a
Yep, that's
day.
me. That's me.
Yeah.
That's
So
me.
so for if I am on TikTok, it's to just kind of evoke feelings of nostalgia or happiness. I used to do a lot of videos about fandom as well. And so to hear people's perspectives on that was really engaging and exciting. Um, Twitter, I get some news, although I find that the loudest voices are not necessarily the ones with the best authority. And so
Right.
I think media literacy, I mentioned, fashion magazines and like magazines back in the day and all of the unrealistic standards that we grew up with. You have to be cognizant of that on social media, because
Are
so much
you
of what we
loving the
see.
Jack song? Uh,
Oh, I did hear that.
right.
I mean, it speaks the truth, and I think media literacy people take everything they see on social media for at face value, and that's really not a good idea. I would highly encourage some critical thought there, and if you see something that you don't agree with or makes you feel icky, like really don't like be a troll and comment on it accordingly, but like really think about why. And as you more clearly define what your values are, your behaviors will align with that. So on Instagram, I mean, my metric isn't followers; it's how many of my friends DM'd me being like, "This meme reminded me of you," or like.
Right.
I post in my story about, hey, have you watched this TV show? And people are like, oh my God, this TV show, blah, blah, blah. And we're just having conversations and chatting because it helps me to feel connected to people. I feel like with the pandemic too, while I was self-employed, like those timelines were exactly the same for me. And so too, for 2.5 years, just feeling physically and socially isolated in this hamster wheel of content creation, it I burned out. It became way too much. And so now looking forward, it's like, okay, how I use these platforms um, will be to connect with people. So then if we want to do any creative projects, it can
Right.
be something that's more of a collaborative effort than feeling like I'm always working in a creative silo and that I'm almost like, there have been times where I've been almost afraid to pick up my phone because you don't want to get sucked into it. But
Right.
I schedule notifications because I don't find that, like, for me, I don't have a problem with scrolling because
Right.
I don't scroll. My problem is checking notifications and you interrupting yourself constantly and wasting your precious time. Even a half an hour a day, I would be
There's a
checking
there's a
notifications.
yeah, there's a switching cost, if you're paying attention to some one thing and then you want to check your phone. Um, it's funny that you said scrolling isn't your problem. It hasn't been my problem for a long time. TikTok, I created a bunch of content for them in 2020 as part of their creative learning fund. And I didn't get much out of it except for a lot of dopey hours scrolling through stuff, going
Mm-hmm.
down rabbit holes. But there was a period over, 2015 to 2020 where Facebook started to become more of a professional tool than a personal tool for me
Mm.
because professional groups were using Facebook groups to organize. And at that point, I started opening Facebook up on my work computer. And there is a Chrome plugin, and it works for more platforms than just Facebook, but it's called Newsfeed Eradicator. So literally, when you open Facebook, it will just not even show you that whole center column. They replace it with like a nice, pleasant Maya Angelou quote or something like that. Have you said schedule summary, like, iPhone now you can set notifications to be batch delivered to you through a scheduled summary. Have you ever tried using the time limit feature?
I have, and I'm pleased to report that it never comes up anymore. I had it for Instagram and TikTok, maybe for either 45 minutes or an hour a day,
That's
and I'm
huge.
I'm never on my phone that long.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm never on my phone that long, which is wonderful. I've found that, yeah, I've really just had to adjust my behaviors so that when I pick up my phone, it's because I'm excited to be there, wherever there on the internet is.
Yeah, so I've seen people, say, found some book, 10 reasons you should delete all of your social media accounts. And I think to your point with, me calling social media our pimp, it's like, no, there's value there. We're getting value in this relationship because we can connect with people, we can learn interesting things. Um, but it also seems, a lot of people just think it's all or nothing, right? Because they can't figure out how to control their use. So if any of you are still on the fence, the app time limits, notifications going in scheduled summary. I've even seen people advocate for, hey, use some of the social media just in the web browser. For instance, I don't have Twitter on my phone because I get lost in the sauce every time. And there's a lot of terrible opinions on that platform. But I will open up Twitter on my phone mobile browser if there's something to see, or if I know that I had thrown something out there and looking to see if anyone replied. When you do it through a web app, then you can't get notifications, right? And it's not as impulsive to just open the app every time you cross the icon. On your home screen. So, do you have
Yeah.
any other funky tips like that I haven't yet mentioned?
For Twitter, I think turning on notifications for certain people, and then that way you just don't check it if you don't get a notification in your scheduled summary for it, because chances are like you really anything that you might see on your feed like is irrelevant and not worth you checking your phone for. You have to remember too, your attention is really really valuable. In terms of these social media platforms, it can mean ad dollars and revenue for them, but for you it's like people are always talking about kind of like a quote balance between IRL and URL. And it's like, no, no, no. At this point, it's 2023. They're integrated. Real life is online and vice versa. So
I love that.
that's your time. This is your life. It is not dress rehearsal. It is not like in preparation for a better you. Like, no, this is happening right now.
Right now.
Life, it's unfolding. It's yours.
Yes.
It's the only one you have. Why would you be wasting your attention on something that drains the literal life out of you? And kind of how you were saying with using platforms for business too, granted, your mindset about literally everything, like you truly design your own reality day in and day out. But I do think that putting on your little business owner hat can be super helpful too, because if I ever go on TikTok, it's to do research or to find a particular account or video or something like that. So then you're not in this mindset of like, all right, back to the doom scrolling. It's like you
Right.
have this word has come up so many times, intention around what you're doing, and just that little bit of mindfulness. It can really take a day where you're like, what the heck did I get done today? To like, wow, I feel like I didn't just waste my day and have nothing to show for it. I think social media can be the biggest pitfall in, and I don't mean to say productivity in a hustle culture way, but just like a sense of calm and peace and contentment around your work day.
If I
That's it.
use a word from and this will get me being a little esoteric, but self-actualization, the part where you get to be the best version of yourself, do the creative projects, grow and as a human being, it can take away from that. if you don't have the awareness and intention. So, Nicole, thank you so much. I want to make sure we get a link to Brian's the he was your guest. He was the
Yeah.
one that gave this great quote about getting tired, but algorithms don't.
Mhm.
Where else can people find you?
Absolutely. So it's literally at Nicole Tremaglio everywhere: Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and it's my website.com as well. And then that's where you can find out more info about the podcast too, Nostalgia.
That is awesome. So let's just make it make sense to wrap it up. Should we delete our social media accounts? It's totally up to you. If you focus on the actual people you want to connect with and the content you want to consume, and you just bring awareness and intention to how it all makes you feel, then you can keep it feeling good for you rather than feeling bad. And it's as simple as that. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I will say to our listeners, thank you for listening to Make Sense with me. I'm your host, Lindsay Tabus, with Nicole Tremaglio. We hope you enjoyed our take on Web3 and how we can connect with each other with more intention. So, if you want to continue to be the smartest person in the room, hit the subscribe button for next week's episode. I'm in the early days with this, and every subscriber on YouTube specifically makes a huge difference. Look at me hawking for followers after this whole conversation. But I love it. I have fun on YouTube. I love doing video. So that's my awareness and intention. As always, you can check out all the links and resources in the show notes. That's all for this episode. Catch up with you next time. Thank you, Nicole, for joining me.